intro and
I already
then
clicked it.
you did it. Oh,
Yeah.
horrible intro on my part. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Midwestern Marks live stream. Today, I am here with Eddie and Carlos to discuss the recent debate that our boy Eddie had with prominent video games slash kind of political streamer guy Vish. So we're gonna go right into our intro and then get to that.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to make up for that terrible start with this good one. I was able to listen to the entire debate that Eddie Lager Smith had with video game streamer Vitch this morning and this afternoon at work. And I think it's pretty much it's a done deal. There was one person there presenting facts and trying to take this seriously, as it's a very serious war. People are dying. And there was someone else that, considered himself above it all. And he was able to just, mock and lie and whatever else. And yeah, Vitch lost. There's no other way to put it. He got very upset that he wasn't able to rile Eddie up, and I think that I don't know. I don't want to ramble here, but my entire takeaway is it made him, with all of his childishness and like mock, all that kind of stuff, made him look weak. It made him look like he had nothing to say, and it made him look unserious.
Yeah. I wanted to start by premising that congratulating Eddie. Of course, we had a long talk after the debate yesterday, but it's an audience of a different size that we're sometimes engaging with sizes that big, but it's an audience of it's a whole different monster going in front of 6,500 live people and defending a line that, even uh, the most hegemonized part of the left, the democratic socialist and Vaush types that are really the compatible left, that they're very much in line with NATO and American imperialism, and going up against that and defending a real anti-imperialist position, defending the truth, which is that this has been a U.S. and NATO fully provoked conflict in the hopes of waging this proxy war that they're waging against Russia. It takes tremendous courage, and that's not something that you find often in the left, even the communist left. So, he had a whole bag of sleazy tactics that he used against you, but throughout it all, you kept to the facts, you kept your cool, and you presented the truth to an audience that, if they're following Vaush with any consistency, then they're clearly not engaging with it quite often. So I think you did a tremendous job, and we had talked for a long time before that whether this sort of event was worth it, and I came out thinking that it was, because it showed very clearly the superiority of your seriousness and your positions, which are grounded in substance, and his, which are just grounded in rhetorical devices and sophism to try to make you look bad. But in reality, even his position was not ever substantially argumented for, and then he ends by doing the projection, which is everything that he says you are is in reality what he ends up being, to any neutral observer at least.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm wanting to get as much feedback as possible. I mean, from people who I respect, obviously, like Dylan Burns and those other streamers in Vaush's sphere are gonna, with Ukraine flags in their bios, they're working backwards from their conclusion, right? There's no evidence you could possibly present that are gonna change those people's mind. But, to the people in that audience who were willing to have their minds changed, I hope we were able to do that for some people. And, like we said, I had not wanted to debate Vaush for a long time, despite him offering, to have me on his show with his giant platform, because we know that he's not necessarily an honest actor and that he's very articulate. He's got good rhetorical skills and he's good at tripping people up and then declaring himself the winner of these debates. And, it's not the Socratic method where you're going back and forth to try and get to the truth, because you have one person who's a sophist who's working backwards from their conclusion. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in winning and pushing their side. But I thought, this is only my third debate. I thought no matter how it went, it would be a great learning experience, for the future. And that's what this person says. Vaush being childish. If Eddie betters his wording, he'd be a great debater. I think, I do have some of those skills, but it takes practice. You have to hone your skills. So what a better way to do it than to debate one of the biggest sophists, one of the biggest rhetoricians in the online streaming world. So I think it was good. I think I learned a lot from it. And yeah, I'll let other people say, whether you won or lost or give feedback. I was just interested in telling the truth on that stream, more so than winning or losing. But yeah, I think it went well. I'm pretty happy with it. There are a few things I would like to go back and, sharpen my wording basically, or throw in a few extra points, but you're always going to have that in an hour and a half debate. So, and thank you ILL State Fishing for the $5 and for being a YouTube member. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, ILL. I think one of the things that I noticed in watching how he engages is that it's dishonesty through language, right? What he does is you'll say a thing and he will turn it slightly into something else, right? And then walk it down this path to your general statement becomes his specific one that is not the specific thing that happened. So your general statement would seem from the subjective view he's trying to push like it was incorrect, but it wasn't that subjective statement at all. And I noticed you see him do this at some point and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what I said, right? The part that really gets to me though is that used to work on everybody all the time. And you would see sort of in the early 2000s, that was how discussions were won. But these days, I really think people are wising up to it. It doesn't do what it used to do. It used to make someone, even stupid, appear as if they were very smart. It would make them appear as if they knew what they talked about. But nowadays, it makes them look weak, like they don't actually, like they're afraid to engage in what you're actually saying. And I think that's really important. I noticed him doing this specifically in regards to when you were talking about Angela Merkel, right? And her admitting that they had no intention of ever standing by the Minsk Accords. He changes this into pretending that you were saying Angela Merkel said that NATO was going to invade Russia, which you'd never said, you'd never implied, but he takes these steps of doing that. And it's just so sleazy and gross. And it just betrays this sort of hollow superiority of the remnants of the middle class. I don't know any working class people that talk like that these days. I just don't, right? It's only these sort of rich kids who get by on daddy's money. You know what I mean? Because that's how they grow up. They can't see out of that. And so when he accuses you of lying later on, I think that's the same phenomenon happening, right? Because he can't see out of where he is. he's assuming that everyone occupies the same social consciousness that he does. And so he can't recognize a different, more proletarian consciousness when he comes about it. He has to assume that you're lying, which is why he can't engage with your resources. He can't engage with your citations. You notice when you bring up Oliver Stone, who's internationally recognized, right? No one debates the facts of Ukraine on fire. He dismisses it all as, well, don't you think it's biased?
They interviewed Putin. They interviewed Putin. Like, he's not an important person to talk to in this conflict.
Right.
You know, we can't talk to anybody who we disagree with, though. Otherwise, it's biased Russian propaganda. Yeah, that I couldn't believe it at a point with the Angela Merkel thing, and maybe I misspoke a little bit, and but they were also getting an English translation. They Google translated the article, so it was off. But I was like dumbfounded at a point as he kept rambling about it. I'm like, this is somebody taking Angela Merkel admitting, one of the biggest leaks or one of the biggest mess ups that a NATO leader has made to the press throughout this entire conflict. Her admitting that they were never going to follow Minsk, that they just wanted to build up NATO's military capacity in Ukraine. And he was trying to use that as a gotcha against me, as a gotcha for the NATO argument. It's like, this is a piece of evidence that's like a smoking gun against your side. But he's able to use rhetoric to be like, oh, you're just make it seem like that's a point for him. And it's not. Like, no matter how loud you get, Vaush, no matter how much you go, oh, are you really saying that that's what she said? Or you just lied. No matter how much you freak out, you're still wrong. And you're still using a piece of evidence that proves our side correct.
And one of the things that was central to his discourse, especially early on, was trying to stop you as you're building a narrative. But, Marxist jargon, you would say, as you're concretizing, as you're developing all of these facts in their interconnection so that you can paint a picture of the whole conflict. He stops you and he's like, no, let's stop here. Let's stop here. Let's stop. And in terms of like methodology of approaching the world, that's the essence of like bourgeois thinking. You see things in their disconnections. You think that you're right when you're able to just hone in on one specific thing and see it separate from everything else. And what you're actually doing is separating that fact from the factors, and you'll never be able to understand it. Because the fact arises thanks to the factors that allowed the fact to be a fact. And you kept on trying to do that. And at some point, you didn't get mad, but you mentioned if you look at this through a dialectical materialist lens, you realize that it's absolutely necessary to look at history to see how it is that these things that we're looking at, they don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in interconnection to a whole series of other processes that in order to understand that one thing that you want to hone in, I have to give you a view of all these other things that it presupposes, right? You cannot understand it without understanding all the things that it presupposes. And he kept on preventing you from doing that. And I think you were able to do that, over the whole thing. You were able to present a picture that connected all of the important facts and presented a view of the totality in a way that viewed the events of today in a correct manner. But he kept on trying to prevent you from doing that. And that act of let's just continue narrowing in to the point where, to a point of absurdity, really. One of the things we talked about in the phone call yesterday was this old sort of fallacy, reductio ad absurdum, which means that you're reducing things to the point of absurdity. And the classical argument here is Zeno of Elea. In order to argue against the existence of change, in order to say that change was an illusion, one of the paradoxes that he had, Aristotle said he had 4, but one of them was that in order to get from point A to point B, you have to go halfway. And to go halfway, you have to go halfway between that. And he says that there's an infinite amount of halfways. And as finite creatures, we cannot cross an infinite spectrum. Therefore, change is an illusion because that's a contradiction. He was trying to do something similar by continuously reducing to the point of absurdity and trying to dizzy you, which he never achieved. He took things to a point of ridiculousness that no one in their right mind going into a debate is going to remember very specific dates. That's just absurd. The point is to construct a narrative. And he was trying to build up gotcha moments for you in a way that I think any non-Vaush fan, neutral observer would be able to see through and see what's really going on there.
Yeah, I think this brings up another really, really sleazy rich kid. I'm going to say sleazy rich kid move quite a bit. But it's another thing that makes him look weak when you know what he's doing. Did you notice that he forced you into it on his turf where he controlled the technology? He was therefore able to be much louder than you. So when you're trying to explain your point and not letting him interrupt you, him talking drowns that out. And it's just another sign of him being weak and unable to actually engage with what you're saying. So in one time, the process goes, he forces you into this hole where you're so specific that rather than describing, say if it's a person, you are having to describe the interior of one cell in order to prove this is a person, right? And then he's manipulating the language of when you say neutron or something, and he goes, wait, did you just say electron? Right? Or whatever it is, something you didn't say. And at the same time, as you're trying to explain yourself, his volume is going over you while he sits there pretending he's superior from this place of absolutely nothing, having earned nothing, right? And is able to shout that down. And I have one other thing to say, and it's like escaping my mind as I think of it. I'll get back to it. I'm sure I'll remember it.
Yeah, I want to take a second to acknowledge the super chats. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to Joe from earlier. He said, hone your skills in the ring. Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I definitely noticed like what I would say is almost like a cultural disconnect between me and Vaush, and like that we're just such different people. Like he's born and raised in Beverly Hills. I don't know about born, but he lives in Beverly Hills, and I'm from a Midwest working class family. Like he accused me of clout chasing, which, I mean, sure, like we did want to bring followers to Midwestern Marx during this debate. Duh, why would we not want to do that? We're not idiots. But we didn't even stream the debate, right? Like this would have netted us thousands of views, and it is on YouTube. If we were really clout chasing, we would have streamed the debate, and then it would have allowed us to control the technology, like Noah said. You know, we don't have a producer. We're doing it all on our own, and that's something to learn for the future. But he couldn't even comprehend that I would be doing the debate just to share the truth, just to spread this message, just to get to people. You know, he assumed we had to be chasing clout, even though anyone who understands this online streaming stuff knows that if we were chasing clout, we would have streamed this ourselves. Also, he kept accusing me of reading the Twitch chat, which I assume is something that he does. I think that he's being oftentimes fed sources or fed arguments through his Twitch chat. But I didn't have a Twitch chat. There was no way to view the Twitch chat because we weren't fucking streaming. So he accused me like 3 times of reading chat. I'm like, no, I'm reading my notes, and literally showed him my room at one point, but it was just me and him on Zoom, and then the page of notes that I had taken all day, and he couldn't comprehend that I wouldn't be streaming it and drawing things from my chat. And that's where there's just like a disconnect with me and him, where I feel like he can't even understand our mode of thinking, in actually wanting to get to the truth, actually wanting to improve things. Yeah.
And he blocked the comments on the stream so that only his subscribers were able to comment. And in order to comment, they had to have been a subscriber for a significant amount of time. So it's, you know, you couldn't even have been reading his stream because he prevented anyone that would have been favorable to you from being in the stream and commenting anything positively. But you know, there's so many mechanisms that he used. This sort of fake Socratic method, which he talks about at the end. It's a Socratic method. No, it's absolutely not, because the Socratic method is grounded on trying to find truth, trying to actually get at truth. And Vaush came with predispositions of what was correct, and that's like the opposite of what the Socratic method is. But there was other flaws that in our conversation last night. I felt like some ideas in the history of philosophy helped me think through them. Because when you guys were talking about, he kept on questioning you about where's the connection between Victoria Nuland, having these conversations about which candidates are going to be favorable to lead Ukraine, who's going to be able to represent the interests of the U.S. and Ukraine best, and other, things like NED funding to various civil society groups within Ukraine, and other NGO funding to various groups, specifically, um, groups that have significant influence within Ukrainian civil society, and other groups like the Right Sector and Azov and other far right militias. And he kept on asking you, like, what's the necessary connection here? Like, you have one fact, and then you have another fact, but then you have to connect them. And what that reminded me of is David Hume, right? He paints this picture. For him, everything's experience. You have two types of experience. You have impressions, which are what we would call experience, and then you have ideas, which are reflections, less vivid reflections of those impressions. And he says that every single idea is a reflection of an impression. And so he brings into doubt the question of causality, which is fundamental in this world that's dominated by Newtonian physics. And his question is, well, where do we actually see necessary connection? And his argument is that we don't. We have the idea of necessary connection, of cause and effect, because we project that onto the world. We see one event happen, and then we see another one. And if we see that repeatedly enough, our mind thinks of it in the form of a habit, and it expects the second one to happen once it sees the first. And that's what we call cause. And this is just massive for the history of philosophy, but it's very easily debated against, because what Hume does is basically abstract away from the actual connections in reality and presuppose in a very abstract fashion, an idealist fashion, that there is something beyond the necessary connection that you're seeing right there when you see one billiard ball hit another one and then it moves, right? It's an act of abstraction which asks for something else when necessary connection is right in front of them. And it's the same thing that Vaush was doing. You were telling him you have these NGOs like the NED, like you didn't mention other ones like the Ford, Rockefeller, and the Soros Foundation, and a few other ones, right? Open Society, that are doing the same thing. But you mentioned the NED, which is the main one. It's been the main arm of like this, basically the CIA. He's asking for necessary connection when what you're describing is the necessary connection. And by making that same Humean move, he's able to confuse people and be like, oh, really? There's no necessary connection, when literally what you're describing is the connection.
Yeah, it was wild. And he kept going, like, name one. And 5 seconds before that, Eddie had said the NED, right? And like, to have dollar amounts and whatnot is not really how that works. What you do is you look at the 100 news stories where there are government agents talking about this, right? White House spokesman, as far back as Bill Clinton, was talking about funding the anti-Soviets within Ukraine, right? Open Society was there before 91, by the way, starting in 1990. It's like all you have to do is look for these things. And so it really, it makes it so that there's two options. One, either Vaush has no idea any of this stuff exists and he's never looked and, has never bothered seeing if his narrative holds up to any scrutiny whatsoever, in which case he is lying about his narrative, right? And knowing it's true. Or two, he knows these exist and he's lying about knowing they exist. Either way, he's lying. And I mean, like my dad used to say, if you're lying, you're already losing. It reminds, there was at one point during that, and I forget the exact instance, but it's when it really struck me that what he was trying to do was paint himself as so superior that he could act stupid. And in doing
yes, that was what it was, because he even admitted it towards the end. He's like, if you haven't noticed, I've been like very condescending and dismissive. I'm like, okay, I feel like that's not going to come off well to the broader audience. Like, you're not debating, you're not arguing your side then, right? You're just dismissing everything I said and trying to, appeal to authority, basically, and gaslight. Like, his fans always call Tanky schizophrenic. It's literally just gaslighting. They're appealing to this narrative that's pushed out by the NED, by Bellingcat, by all these NGOs, by corporate media. And they're saying, oh, you disagree with the mainstream media narrative? You disagree with Wikipedia? You're literally schizophrenic. It's to gaslight people who find the truth and who read independent journalism into thinking, oh, am I wrong? But like, thankfully, we're not gonna fall for that shit because we know what we believe.
People are less and less falling for that. But that's the perfect example of him doing that. Is at the end where he talks about, he literally calls for regime change in Russia, which would cause a nuclear fucking war.
Right.
Period.
That would be Putin's fault, though.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he bases this on his seeming ability to read Putin's mind. Right? He has some insight into the inner workings of Vladimir Putin that is so good that he can see that Putin has no rationality whatsoever. Right? It's not that Putin is working in ways he can't understand because he has no information on it. No matter what it is, he has to be irrational. He has no sense of logic. There's nothing guiding his decisions. Just he's willy-nilly, woo, let's go invade Ukraine. Even listening to the guy, even if you don't agree with it, he has a rationality. And so to paint yourself as so superior that because you can't be bothered to learn what that is, it's irrational, is just the epitome of middle-class pomposity, right? It's not being able to see out of the middle class.
By the way, thank you, Shauna Jana. Eddie showed integrity, honesty, and intellect way beyond Vaush's capabilities. Eddie will stay always winning. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the donation. But you're absolutely right, Noah. It's a complete topsy-turvy world that he lives in. It's, as Parenti would say, it's an invented reality that is in. And when you compare the invented reality to reality itself, reality seems schizophrenic. It seems like a false projection. And he started using this language towards the end of Putin as an irrational, bloodthirsty actor. And I mean, guys, we just had a study come out last week that since the beginning of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, 4.5 million people have been killed. Dozens of millions of people have been displaced from their homes. Part of what the study didn't mention is that some of the bombs used in these attacks are uranium depletion bombs, which cause birth defects, which cause higher cancer rates and higher rates of horrible things in these populations, which is something that they did to Yugoslavia, and those areas have significantly higher cancer rates than others. It's a tremendously bloodthirsty system. As Marx used to talk about capitalism, it comes dripping from head to foot in blood and dirt. And that's what American imperialism has been doing, not just since the beginning of the war in Iraq, but as other studies have shown, in the first 30 years of its dominance as the imperial hegemon after World War II, more than 30 million people have been killed. In the 20-30 years after that, the same thing. So it's a system that fundamentally kills people. It's a violent system. And if you want to talk about a bloodthirsty country, you talk about the U.S., you talk about NATO, you talk about American imperialism. To talk about Putin as a bloodthirsty leader, when you have the Donetsk and Lugansk asking for 8 years for Russia to step in and stop the shelling of their people and the violent attacks and really terroristic and torturous attacks on the part of Nazis that are acting with impunity in the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine, they asked for 8 years. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the official opposition party within Russia, the second largest party, has been asking for Putin and United Russia to step in since the beginning. They recognized the republic since the beginning, and Putin still didn't do that. And it wasn't up until the very end that Putin recognized the two republics, and that with doing so, guaranteed that if they continued to be attacked, Russia would step in. And that was the moment that, that was basically the last straw that was given to the West, and the West didn't take it. Putin had to step in. And if anything, what you can say is that far from being, an irrational, very actively bloodthirsty actor, Putin has shown to be the complete opposite. He's been extremely sensible in the face of absurd attacks that any other world leader, if the U.S. would be, an intensified version of this, but any other rational world leader would have acted much sooner and with much more ferocity. From the beginning of the special military operations in Ukraine, the whole point of Russia's operations have been to minimize the amounts of death, to attack the places where there's no civilians, to just try to focus on the Azov and the neo-Nazi battalions in Ukraine, and even try to stay away from, the regular military that's not, fully Nazified. And it's been genuinely an attempt at denazifying Ukraine. And the Nazis are the ones that have made it impossible. I don't know if you remember, in the first few months of the war, the Nazis were literally barricading cities to prevent civilians from leaving, so that the Russian bombs that would land in those areas necessarily would kill civilians, and they could use that as atrocity propaganda. It's been completely absurd. And to talk about Putin as a bloodthirsty, irrational actor, it's a complete topsy-turvy view of the world that only makes sense because Vaush's reality is, as Parenti would say, an invented reality. It's not grounded in the actual world.
Right. And if you look at the lead up, you're good. If you look at the historical development that led to the conflict, that disproves Vaush's idea. One, that you say that Putin's acting irrationally, whether you agree with him or not, he's acting rationally. And then if you look at the pressure that the KPRF, the Communist Party, has exerted on him, and the disagreements that they've stated about him, it disproves Vaush's idea that Putin is an autocratic leader making all the decisions in Russia. I don't know where he got that idea from, somewhere in Western media, but there are many different forces in Russia, just like there are in America, that Putin needs to navigate, right? And the KPRF is one of them.
And branches of the government. There's the state Duma, there's the oblast level, and it's wild.
One of the things I wanted to bring up during the debate that I didn't get to, that mentions what Carlos, or that has to do with what Carlos said about the Ukrainians barricading civilians in, is the SBU was picking up, torturing, and killing any Ukrainian mayors in the cities who were creating humanitarian escape routes to Russia. So not only were these NATO-trained ethno-nationalists lining up to sweep through the Donbass and basically do a genocide, but they were killing anybody who wanted to evacuate the civilians, because they wanted to kill the civilians too.
Yeah.
So and that is like largely where Vaush was claiming that everyone from right sector was in Kiev where the violence started, and then they marched all the way to the Donbass. And I was trying to explain that right sector is a broad political party made up of many different people in many different cities, but a lot of the violence began outside of Kiev. I talked about this with Haas after the debate, after I accidentally went on the infrared show, which was interesting, but I'll talk about that in a sec. But that's the violence started outside of Kiev, actually, in those cities where they were killing Russian mayors. And Vaush acted like he couldn't understand that right sector is a party with a lot of different members in a lot of different areas.
One of the reasons he gets to Putin is irrational is because he was, rather than trying to construct the timeline of events, he was trying to force you to do so while ignoring key parts of it, right? And so he's trying to hyper focus on these details to the exclusion of really important ones. And that's how he gets there. And I want to sort of there's one big thing that he forgot. The Odessa massacre, right? And this was the impetus for the official opposition to Putin, who are our allies, right? The Communist Party, to renew their calls for assistance. And this is why the Donetsk People's Republics decided to secede. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, was the Odessa massacre. They were like, we're not going to get justice here. We need to protect ourselves. And so he ignores that to try to make it seem as if they were just like, one day they're like, oh, hey, we don't want to be in this country anymore, like for no reason whatsoever. And it's like Carlos was saying before, if you can't put that history together, it does seem irrational to you, right? And so since he wasn't allowing that to happen, that's how he can get there.
Well, I couldn't name the exact time of day that it happened, so therefore the trade union massacre didn't actually happen. So that's actually Vaush logic. How it works.
How many exactly people were in there? If you don't know that, it's fake.
Right, yeah. Exactly how many people were in it? What were the middle names of the perpetrators? Were they married? These are the important questions. I want to say thanks to all we got a bunch of super chats here. Thank you so much, David Burney, the OG Patreon. Eddie, appreciate you talking to Haas yesterday. Hopefully more between you. That was actually an accident. I mean, it was fun. We had a great conversation, but somebody was like, hop in this voice chat and deconstruct the debate. I'm like, okay. And I hop in the voice chat, and all of a sudden I was on the infrared show. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess we're doing this now. I was planning on breaking it down a little bit with Carlos, but I'm glad we got to wait. I just got to talk about, Haas got to talk about some of the areas where he had knowledge that I had missed during the debate. And then we got to have Noah with us to break this down today. So it worked out better anyways. Thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you. Huge thank you to Duck Hash Brown's $20 super chat. That's enormous. How are you going to play Too Cool for School in the political debate between two people whose livelihoods are centered on geopolitics? That's the other thing, is how are you going to feign ignorance? And that's what I was saying at the end. You feign ignorance, like, oh, I'm just learning about this. I'm just learning about this. But then he always ends up siding with NATO. He always ends up siding against the U.S.'s enemies, right? It's always working backwards from its conclusion. And, even if it's an issue like this where he's clearly, doesn't have a good grasp on the facts and hasn't done a lot of research here, he still postures as an expert. And, that's enough for him. He'll just, even if he has no idea what he's talking about, like yesterday, he'll just posture as an expert and try and, get you with rhetorical tricks. Whereas, when you engage with people like Radhika Desai, Gabriel Rockhill, Alan Freeman, the people that we're friends with here at the Institute, you learn from talking to them, right? It's a genuine sort of conversation, or when we debate things, a genuine form of debate where they want to learn from us and we want to learn from them and get to the truth together, right? Vaush isn't doing that. He's I know I've said this already, but he's working backwards from a conclusion and then trying to use rhetorical tactics to say, I won, I did it, I'm the debate master. Subscribe to my YouTube and donate to my Patreon.
It doesn't matter what your reasoning is or what words you use. If you continually side with our ruling class, nothing you say matters. What matters is the concrete implication. If you side with imperialism, you're on the side of imperialism. You can say, yes, but this is the revolutionary defense of the Western ruling class. Is that a thing?
Right. One more super chat here. Love your work. Thank you, Julio. Love your work. Vaush was so rude and condescending throughout the whole debate. Absolutely. I think that came off to people who are genuinely interested in learning and getting to the truth, right? Like and it made me wonder, like, who are the people and or bots who actually fall for Vaush's stick? It's probably a lot of kids and a lot of people who probably spend too much time online. But people who, I can't imagine that people who are interested in learning, people who are interested in the truth, and people who are interested in revolution won't see through that bullshit. I have a feeling that they will, and that, more than anything, the fact that I'm genuine will come off to quote unquote normal people in that debate. Now I got another super chat here. Thank you all. They're coming in like crazy today. I really appreciate it. Tuning in while inspecting compaction around the new sewer line. Solidarity, all. You bet. Some people know my favorite thing is when people call or tell us that they're listening to Midwestern March while they're at work. It's fucking badass. So, yeah, keep getting after it and organize your workplace. Love it. Thanks for the support, man.
Thank you, everybody, for the support.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention that I noticed in the debate, specifically later on, is the discourse on invasion, right? Russian invasion. Because one of the things he kept on trying to do was say, okay, if you said that it was provoked, then you're admitting that the person that's provoked is the first in attacking. And that's complete bullshit. And he kept on hammering down, no, this war started specifically in 2014. And what ends up happening is that right before Russia steps in and begins the special military operations, it doesn't just do it out of nowhere. It's not like the same scale of evil that's been wrought on the Donbass people was going to continue. And Russia just said, okay, finally, that's it. No, Russia steps in because, as has been proven, the attacks that were being prepared by the Ukrainian armed forces on the Donbass people was superior than anything else that they would have that they've done over the last 8 years. It would have been a complete massacre, like genocide level attacks. And it is for preemptive reasons that Russia steps in. It's a form of defense, but you can't see it as that if you just, if you're very positivist and you reify things and you separate it from the context and all the factors that allow the activity. If you do that, yeah, it's a Russian invasion. But if you look at it in its context, you realize that it's not. It's a preemptive defense in the same way that if someone raises their hand to hit you and you take them down, no one would say, oh, he started the conflict, he took them down. No, it was a preemptive self-defense. And it was exactly what Russia did to a region of people that are not only ethnically Russian, but a lot of them are Russian citizens. They have dual citizenship. So that's another part of the debate that's often lost, which is if Russia had not stepped in when it did, it would have been a complete massacre of the people in the Donbass region.
Not to mention, there were reports that a giant offensive against Donetsk was going to happen the day Russia sent its forces in, that they were doing this specifically at this time for that reason, to prevent more innocents dying. And I think that's really important because the narrative that Vaush follows is, Russia is evil and irrational. I really liked your analogy, though, Carlos, on, if I hit someone and I only explain that as, I only explain that part of it to you, I look like a jerk, right? But if, say I'm walking down the street and there's Vaush, right? And he's loading a gun and he's going, I'm going to shoot you. As he puts each bullet into the revolver, right? I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to shoot you. And if I, before he puts that sixth bullet in, knock him in the face and he falls down like we all know he would, how am I in the wrong, right? I've defended myself from getting shot. And this is exactly the situation. Russia continually, from the beginning, from the fall of the Soviet Union, said that you cannot do this. And they keep pushing back their red line. And NATO keeps pushing it forward. At some point, they're going to hit you to protect themselves, And then you just,
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, mine will be quick. I just want to say some people... Actually, did you have something to go off of what Noah just said, Carlos? Because I was going to kind of...
I was just going to talk about how this is an existential threat for Russia, but we can get into that after the comments. I had spoken before Noah, so...
Yeah, I was just going to say there were a lot of people who didn't want me to do this debate because they were worried it would go bad. And I totally understand that. And, personally, it's probably not a debate I would have watched, right? Because I don't think Vaush is an honest actor. I don't think there's anything to learn from him. But it's a debate that I would go into to try and win over his followers. And Sam says right here, Vaush's purpose is to keep people in their corner so they don't move on in their political development. Exactly, right. So we wanted to build a bridge, reach out to those followers and bring them over. Like, some people think there's nobody redeemable in Vaush's entire audience. Like, dude, it's an audience of like 500,000 people. Some of our most supportive followers now, like people like Sam Dixon, watched Vaush at one point. And, there's nothing wrong with that, because when you first join the left, when you first realize there's something wrong with our politics that's corrupt and it needs to be changed, you're desperate for mentors, right? You're desperate for people who can explain things to you and explain the complex, especially like the complex inner Marxist or inner leftist debates. You're kind of lost on those, right? And so you're just looking for mentors to explain it. And a lot of people, when they search left-wing stuff on YouTube, the first person who pops up is Vaush. That's kind of how the algorithm works. So there's a lot of people just getting into leftism who fall into Vaush because he, seems like he's being an honest actor, maybe at first. And it's important to not dismiss those people just because they listen to Vaush, right? And that's what I want to do, is reach out. And I think so far, the reaction has been good, and it showed that, we can win a lot of these people over. And help them, not even just win them over, but help them advance in their theoretical development beyond the point where they'll even fall for a person like Vaush.
Yeah, Vaush and people like him sort of act like a net. And I think what you did is you cut a little hole in that net and allowed some people to get through.
That's a good point. And, there's one of the reactions that I've seen from some of our comments is that Like these are just people online. We should really just focus on getting to workers in our workplace and communities, and those two things are mutually exclusive. If there's something that we're constantly talking about is the importance of organizing in person, and we've said it a million times. We can have every person on Twitter like follow us and agree with us, and nothing's going to happen until they actually do something in person. But it's also the case that this sort of ideological war of positions that's taking place in this ideological field of social media and the sorts of media platforms that YouTube and Twitch are, it's absolutely necessary today. And the vast majority of people, specifically in the West, spend anywhere from 7 to 8 hours on their phone in these types of platforms. And a lot of those people are working class people. And in the same way that people from our audience have gone on to organize Starbucks unions, to organize rail, to organize, in Amazon and in various, at the forefront of all the organizing militant labor struggles in the country, there's people that got radicalized by listening to the content from our institute. The same way there's probably people that are in those spaces with Vaush and that are more open-minded than his solid core of supporters that, as someone had mentioned earlier, they probably came to those ideas through Vaush, and it's just this sort of cult of Vaush, and they won't change their minds. But there's probably a big chunk of them that are not like that, and that by hearing you engage and by Vaush kind of shooting himself in the foot in the way that he engaged with you, maybe they'll undergo the beginning of a transformation towards a line that's closer to ours than to Vaush. So, these are sites of struggle in our day, and we can try to be old heads about it and say none of this matters. It's just, but we'd be wrong, because we've shown in practice the influence that these sorts of education and media work can have in reality. And I think
Yeah,
that's really the essence of what we were trying to do with that debate.
for
There is
sure.
a
A
reason.
lot of people watch us while they're at work. Like Samael here saying, "Thank you so much for the super chat, Samael." I usually watch while I'm at work. So again, what Carlos is saying, organizing workplaces is not mutually exclusive to doing things online. Obviously, you have to translate that into real praxis. But thank you so much for the super chat, Vaush. This one's funny. Vaush has never had to defend himself or fight for anything, so he couldn't understand the mind of a martial artist like Putin. I agree. I feel like that feeds into the cultural sort of disconnect between me and Vaush too. The fact that I'm from a working class family and have engaged in martial arts and wrestling my whole life, and I doubt he's had to work hard for much of anything. He's admitted before that he's quite lazy in his own words.
Well, I also think that there's.
But
I try to talk to people like the same way I would talk to them if they were right in front of me. Don't think there's any way he would have taken that attitude with you if he were sitting next to you.
that's true. That's what I need. I need to start doing real life debates. I thought about rolling up with my shirt off and be like, "The tanky is here," but I felt like that would have taken away from me trying to approach rationally. Thank you to the other Noah. If Vaush was more fit, he'd be in Ukraine recruiting assets. Let's see if he actually uploads it on YouTube. Good job, Eddie. Thank you so much, Noah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that there's a reason that the bourgeoisie spend so many millions on click farms and troll farms and all that kind of stuff. The internet is incredibly important in the war of positions.
Right.
And, we don't have that kind of money, obviously, but we can fight against it and we need to.
Right, and we've been doing it organically, which is something that I don't think you could say about some of the biggest players in the game right now, people like Vaush and others. But to say that what we're doing is divorced and irrelevant to like what's done in communities or in workplaces would be like saying that if you get however many people are here, 226 people in an auditorium, and you have this discussion in person where you're trying to break down ideas and, have a learning experience collectively, to say that, oh, that's irrelevant just because you're not directly at the site of workplace or directly in the community. It's the same level of absurdity, if not greater, because some of the people, as you mentioned, some of the people are in their workplaces right now as they're listening to us. And even Noah listened to the debate while he was at work, and he listens to it in a way that his other coworkers, I think, from when we've spoken before, everyone else can listen to it as well, and usually reacts to what's being said too.
Two crews that work at the same job as I do listen to us every time we're on while they're working now. Two different ones. By the way, what's up, Kevin?
What's up, Kevin? Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I think it's important not to lose sight of, you know, how big of an existential threat um, is Russia faced with, and how intensified it was in the moments before the beginning of the special military operations, because there's something that makes Ukraine different from every other like country that has been able to join NATO and that's in the borders with Russia. One, it shares the largest border. Two, the border that it shares is the most convenient for attacking Russia. It's primarily plains and it's the easiest to get directly to Moscow through. Every other major invasion that has taken place against Russia, whether it's Napoleon's or Hitler's, has been done through Ukraine, and that's for a very strategic military reason. It's the place that if you're going to invade Russia and go to war with Russia, you do it through there. So that's very clearly why even though the red line has been pushed back and back and back, the most solid place where the red line will not move is Ukraine, just because of its uh, its its uh, its position in terms of geography and how easy it'd be to get from Ukraine to Moscow and just overthrow the sovereignty of the Russian people. And that at its core, you have here a question of sovereignty. Are we going to respect Russian statehood and its right to exist as a country that, yes, although not socialist, it exists outside of the sphere of influence of empire? And are we going to respect the national self-determination rights of the people in the Donbass who decided that when these Nazis came to power in 2014 and were able to act with impunity in their violence against them, that they had a right to leave Ukraine and to establish themselves as their own nation where they don't have to be terrorized by neo-Nazi terrorism. So, at its core, we have principles here that anyone who is anything familiar with the Marxist tradition, not just Marxism, Leninism, these are principles that go back a long time, that can be found in Marx. No nation which oppresses another can actually be free. You can even take it to 1810 with Cortes de Cádiz and Dioniso Yupanqui, who was a Peruvian delegate, who was the first person to make that statement. You can't be free if you're oppressing another nation. And then it gets repeated by Marx and Engels and Lenin, and it's the basis of a nation's right to self-determination. Right? These are traditions that if you're in any way, shape, or form a part of the left, you would accept, and you would see that principle at play in the attempted secession, which has been successful, of the Donbass region from Ukraine and from a fascist state that wanted nothing but to exterminate, these Russian-speaking people.
One of my favorite parts of the debate that goes off something you said was when Vaush pretended to not understand the geostrategic importance of Ukraine or the military. He's like, why the heck would NATO even want to control Ukraine? They already have Estonia and Latvia. Like, dude, just look at a fucking map. Like, there's miles and miles of border that Ukraine and Russia share, and Ukraine used to be part of Russia, right? And they share a border with Belarus, another one of the U.S.'s main enemies. Estonia and Latvia are two tiny countries, and yes, NATO has a lot of control over them too. But if the U.S. was going to launch anything against Russia, or if they were going to contain Russia, like I was trying to explain the concept of containment to Vaush yesterday too, Ukraine is absolutely vital. I mean, literally just look at a map. Look at a map, and that debunks Vaush's talking point there, that the U.S. could just walk into Russia through Latvia and Estonia and take it over.
And that's even setting aside the economic importance of energy sales, right? And the Nord Stream pipeline that the U.S. blew up.
And he tried to make it seem, he used this point that people often use, which is that the GDP of Texas is larger than Russia. And that's true. But the way that GDP is measured in the U.S. includes all of these phony financial transactions that have nothing to do with actual productive growth. And in other places, for instance, in China, that's not how GDP is measured. And the essence of the Russian economy is in its productive industries and is in its export of oil, specifically to Europe. And what the U.S. was really trying to stop was a moment which was approaching where Europe would no longer be dependent on the US and it would be more dependent on Russia because it got the foundation for its whole civilization, basically, which is the Russian oil. A large percentage of their oil was coming from Russia. So if that connection kept on occurring, it would be extremely disfavorable for American imperialism and the influence of the US in the world, but also with its allies and dependent countries in Europe. And that's what it was really trying to prevent. So, yeah, Russia can have a smaller economy, but the role of its economy is central in geopolitics and specifically Eurasian geopolitics.
And a lot of these countries like Russia, Venezuela, and China have been pointing out we have a real industrial base. We're investing in producing real things. The US is highly financialized, right? So we can have a GDP, but it's a lot of honestly like made up money. Russia's been investing in producing oil, producing natural gas, producing things that can physically power their economy. And that's largely what has provoked this whole conflict is the U.S. recognizes, as Carlos said, the strategic and economic implications of Russia investing in their energy production. So it doesn't matter that they don't have as great of a GDP as the U.S. It's still a threat to the U.S. that they're trading oil with Europe. I also want to say before you guys go, thank you to Vegan Marx and Lonely Walk. Really, really appreciate it.
After 2008, finance and speculation and investment and speculation and finance, right, becomes the primary mode of capital accumulation for our ruling class. That change is gigantic, right? That's huge. That's everything. I also just thought of something from the debate that also piqued my interest. Was it Vaush? I believe, is it Vaush? Whatever. Couldn't understand that when there is a coup, that puts the entire Constitution out the window, right? The government is no longer following the Constitution. So he acts like he has this whole thing about, somewhere in the U.S. seceding, blah, blah, blah. Donetsk and Lugansk no longer are bound by that Constitution because the Nazis that took over tore it up. Right? There is no longer a Ukrainian state at that time. There is instead a Ukrainian neo-Nazi coup government. And anyone who's against the Nazis, who's people who know they're not going to get a say in the government, have every right to take it upon themselves to get away from that. And then what do? They ask tougher people with better armies for help. Of course they do.
And connected to that, one of the most despicable things he did was that he tried to bring this analogy that doesn't fit in any way, shape, or form to it, which was the one of the Southern secession during the Civil War. Like we're talking about apples and vegetables, just fruits and vegetables, two completely qualitatively different things. The secession that was done in Ukraine by the Donbass region was to escape the most heinous form of terroristic fascism that was able to act, as Eddie emphasized correctly, basically with impunity after the U.S. Funded, organized, and orchestrated via Nazi-led forces coup. And they wanted to secede from that. You cannot compare that in any way, shape, or form from the secession of the southern states, which is done for the sake of making the Cotton Kingdom a cotton empire, which is being prevented by the North. I mean, one succeeds to sustain slavery and expand it. The other one succeeds to escape fascistic terror. You cannot compare those two things.
Right. Andy was trying to make the point I think that he was trying to say I didn't know when the war in the Donbass started because I couldn't pinpoint a specific date or time or whatever. And he's like, I could pinpoint a specific date or time in the Civil War, but it's like there was violence that culminated in the Civil War for years and years and years. There was class struggle. There were events like John Brown, going over and just murking a bunch of slave owners because him and his sons were against slavery. And they saw it as morally abhorrent. Just like the coup in the Donbass and the Donbass War, there were years of conflict that culminated in the Civil War, which allowed for a qualitative change of the means of production. And that's why we consider it a revolutionary war. But yeah, I don't know what Vaush was trying to do there. I'm sure he was just trying to paint me as like a slavery defender, because that's what he does.
It's ultimately a problem of ideology, right? He simply cannot see things as processes. He can't understand that everything has a concrete history leading to it, right? He must take things in isolation and narrow his focus so that he only sees this one event, war, right? Rather than everything around it, all of the interconnected phenomenon that lead up to it and arise from it and affect it, and that it affects.
And this is the importance I think that makes our institute stand out from other projects which have had the correct line on this issue and that have, somewhat consistently the correct line on other issues. One of the things we emphasize is that ideological sphere, right? The sphere of worldview, how it is that we're approaching the world, because it is the worldview that, that Eddie, Noah, that myself, and that we, promote here at the Midwestern Marxist Institute. It's the worldview that we have, dialectical materialism, which allows us to assess these situations concretely, to see things in their interconnections, in their process, and from the viewpoint of the whole, and not just very reified, particularized phenomenon. And that's what allows us to provide a complex and concrete and thorough and refined picture of events, which allows us to do what Eddie did yesterday, where he looked like someone who was extremely prepared, knew what he was talking about, debating someone who was just a charlatan. There's a lot of people who know all the facts in the same way, but it's important to hammer out the methodology because there's other events where maybe they don't know all the facts and they're okay with passing judgments without knowing those facts. And, for us, at least from the methodology that we work from, we realize that it takes a concrete study, which means that you start from very abstract facts and you start to concretize, you start to build up your knowledge, to see the interconnections and to participate in this process of a concrete abstraction that allows you to understand things correctly from the standpoint of the totality. And, there's people that will get things correct, but they don't have that method. And insofar as that's how they're engaging in things, they're liable to not getting it correct in another issue because, it's almost accidental. They're not conscious about the fact that precludes their being correct. That's the background of their being correct, which is that they're doing that unconsciously. But if we can do that consciously and use that approach to the world in a consistent manner, we can guarantee us being correct continuously.
And that's why we focus so much on education, because the way we're taught to view things just in our school is wrong. It's too abstract. It's memorizing dates. It's memorizing events, and it leads to mistakes. It leads to not being able to understand what's going on around us. A lot of times people who think they know what time it is basically will, get upset when they're confronted with a more concrete view, and it just doesn't compute. But when you open yourself up to learning like this, right, and seeing that, this world outlook that begins developing with Marx and Engels and continues on, allows us to sort of look deeper than we're originally taught. I don't know, for me, anyway, it just opens up the entire world. And I don't know, I'm rambling, but yeah, it's important. And it's important to spread this world outlook and explain how it works. And
Yes.
by the way, first Marxism school starts tomorrow, guys.
Yes.
That will teach people to do just that.
Right. Ideology is important, right? Some people say, I'm above ideology. I don't have an ideology. You do. Everybody has an ideology, and ideology is just a world outlook. So we have to study ideologies. What are the different ideologies? What are they based on? How do they work? And, what is the best ideology then to actually get to the truth? And that's where we arrive at dialectical materialism. I also want to, people are talking about how Vaush was calling me out for reading notes during the debate. That was another area where I just felt like there was a huge disconnect between me and him, where he couldn't comprehend why I had spent the whole day reading and preparing notes for that debate. And I'm like, dude, because I take this stuff seriously. I don't want to come on here and tell people anything that's wrong. So I spent, 6 hours that day reading more on Ukraine on this issue that I've already been following forever, but I just wanted to brush up and dig into a few topics, and I had 13 pages of notes pulled up. Yeah. But for him, that was worth mocking. That was, oh, you prepared for this debate? You actually care about the subject matter? Like, yeah, dude, I'm not just going to come and read off Wikipedia like you.
And he made it seem as if the notes that you took to prepare to, like yesterday, which are a culmination of the fact that we've been covering this since the beginning. He made it seem as if your research was just done yesterday. And then when you mention Ukraine on Fire, and you phrase it as it's a really good movie to see how all of these facts are related to each other and to actually see them. He tried to play it off as if your whole world outlook was based on a movie, right? And if you look at his face, that's what he was like trying to hint at for the people watching, like, oh, this guy's whole thing is based on a movie, right? And it's completely absurd. It's very dishonest, and I think a good portion of people were able to read through that.
I also think that this is very, very typical of ideologues like this. Since, as Eddie has said a bunch of times, he isn't engaged in a search for the truth, but instead a search to verify his preconceptions, right? He's worked backwards from his conclusions. So what he did was hound you and say, I need a source for this, a source. And then Eddie provides two very good sources. And his immediate response was, not that one, not that source, right? Because he's not interested in an actual source. So immediately when you give him a source, he's like, yes, but don't you think that would be a biased source? As if there is something outside of bias, as if everything doesn't have a bias, as if people aren't smart enough to think critically, no matter what the bias of a source may be. Right?
That's the most successful form of ideology, right? The one that conceives of itself as neutral. We talked about it when we did the reaction to Ryan Chapman. I'm above ideology. I'm going to try to be objective. And Eddie just mentioned that there's some people that no, I'm not ideological. That's when ideology is the most ingrained, because you don't see these assumptions playing a role in shaping how it is that you know the world. They end up becoming unknown knows. You don't know that you know them, but they shape how it is that you view the world. And that's the essence of preconceived assumptions. And it's it's so fundamentally dishonest, because Eddie had mentioned a bunch of scholarly sources before that, because all of us have been reading up on this, both from journalistic pieces but also from peer-reviewed articles and books, and a bunch of different sources. So we can pull a ton, but for the sake of the audience, people who are not used to reading peer-reviewed papers or long journalistic articles, Ukraine on Fire is a great place for them to start their process of learning about this affair and how it builds up, because it goes all the way back to World War II and the funding by the West of the Nazis and the Banderites and their collaborations with Hitler and the Hitlerite forces and their genocides of the Polish people, of Slavic people, of Jews. It's a fantastic film, and he tried to use that recommendation that Eddie gave for people to check the film out, as if it was him saying, this is the only source that that I'm pulling all my information from, and it's extremely dishonest. And I think most people read through it.
And
Of
there were
course
plenty
it
of
did.
resources that I gave him beyond the film, which I'm very glad I was able to expose his audience to, because I'm sure he would never tell them that Ukraine on Fire even exists. And if any of them, if even one of them says, maybe I'll watch that, they'll learn a lot. But I also name dropped Robert Perry, Consortium News, Ivan Kachanovsky, a lot of really great outlets doing independent reporting that, again, aren't just coming from this movie. And a lot of these are scholarly peer-reviewed sources, especially the work of Ivan Kachanovsky is incredibly in-depth and detailed, explaining how the coup was orchestrated. But then if anybody, from his audience is curious and wants to learn more, once they start digging into those sources, they'll see how fallacious and how wrong Vaush's opinions are. So I was really happy that I was able to name drop Robert Perry and Consortium News and a handful of people who would look at someone like Vaush and consider them a NATO imperialist.
We got to
And
get a
it's
shirt with.
specifically that. Oh,
We
I'm going
got
to
to
be
get a
real
shirt.
quick, Carlos.
No, just connected to this.
Oh.
We got to get a shirt with Noah doing the pen thing. By the way, we got to offer that up on our merch store.
It's the Jew in me. I talk with my hands, and I am holding a pen. It's this specific point though that proves exactly how ideological Vaush is, right? Because when you provide him with the source Consortium News, he doesn't go for an article and think critically about it, look for sources. He goes and checks some online, trustability meter or trustometer or whatever, because what he's doing is believing. He isn't thinking critically. He's looking for something that aligns with what he already thinks and then agrees with it or disagrees with it, believes it or dismisses it. He can't engage with anything outside of that. He just can't.
True. And what's nice is his even whatever online respectability meter he was using, it must not be totally bunk. Because it said Consortium News is an accurate source. I'm like, yes. Like, please, if anyone from Vaush's audience starts reading Consortium News, it'll take a week before they're not Vaush fans anymore, because they'll realize he's doing the work of the imperialists and corporate media and NGOs like Bellingcat, who are propaganda arms of the U.S. State Department. Thank you so much, Ryan Tracy, for becoming a YouTube member, by the way. Appreciate
Thank
that.
you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. And one of the funny things is that there was speckles of moments where he started word dropping things to sound as if, because the whole conversation, you could have switched Vaush out and put any other, explicitly mainstream neoliberal hack, and it would have been the same. But there's speckles in the conversation where Vaush is talking about neoliberal imperialism, neoliberal capitalism, and what the U.S. has done around the world. And that gets to the essence of, the absence of dialectical thinking, of the purity fetish, and of, what Eddie has called hindsight anti-imperialism. They can only critique things when it's in the abstract and when it doesn't matter anymore. So in 20 years, it's going to be proven that everything that we've been discussing for the last 2 years since the special military operations began was correct. And then in 20 years, Vaush is going to be a great spokesman against the war. And that's usually how it is. That's how it was with Iraq. That's how it was with Libya. That's how it was with Syria. That's how it's been in every single major case where people, once the drums of war are beating, once all of the media has consolidated behind the narrative, once the invented reality is out there, and and they're trying to manufacture consent through atrocity propaganda, through getting at people's emotions, through appealing to the emotions that leftists stand for, whether it's a very humanistic ethic that we uphold. Once all of that's going on, it's very difficult to question that narrative, and beyond questioning, to openly do so and be critical of it and provide the truth. It's very, very difficult. It takes not only the capacity to see through the bullshit, but the courage to actually put it forward, as Eddie did yesterday. It's a lot easier to do that once the issue has died down, once the substance of the fight has gone away, and pretty much everyone ends up agreeing that, okay, this was bad. We made a quote-unquote mistake. And that's what Vaush is going to be doing in 15, 20 years. He's going to be saying, this was that, and he's going to continue having that abstract anti-imperialism that every time something concrete happens, instead of applying an anti-imperialist lines, he becomes a left-wing legitimizer of imperialism and a delegitimizer of both socialist states and anti-imperialist states existing outside of the sphere of influence of empire.
It's just another controlled agent, right, of counter hegemony. That's all it is, I mean, what we often call the fake left, right? It's, or what Rockhill calls a radical recuperator. They exist to, like the net example I was giving earlier, catch people who may be pushed into revolutionary momentum and just keep them sort of treading water in this area where they support imperialism while pretending they don't. I sort of go over that in the paper that I'll have coming out soon, but it's the prominent form of the left in our society right now. And if you look at it on a materialist level, it's no left whatsoever. It is the deepest reaction.
Absolutely. The one thing that refutes my anti-imperialism and hindsight claim is Yugoslavia, because Vaush still supports the NATO carpet bombing of Yugoslavia and dismantling. So maybe he will still support NATO in a few years.
Maybe.
But, you know, he's just as disgusting for... I think maybe it's because that imperialist project is still ongoing. The NATO expansion towards Russia is still ongoing. Then in 20 years, maybe he'll be like, oh, yeah, Yugoslavia was bad too. Thank you so much, Orange N64, for another super chat and for being a member. Vaush drives a luxury SUV in a highly urbanized area with a walkable community and excellent transit in Seattle. All you need to know. Yeah, definitely a disconnect there between the privilege, I guess, for lack of a better word, the class position, I should say.
You know, I was once stuck in Capitol Hill for a week in Seattle, and the Capitol Hill rich kids are the worst. The worst rich kids. Oh, they're bad. And I don't want to get into the whole thing, but typical.
I think just to wrap up soon because Eddie has to go. I think he did a splendid job. I think that the people that watch the debate are going to be, it's going to be very easy for them to see who was honest, who was prepared, who had truth on their side, and who was a charlatan and a clown. You know, whether it helps us develop the institute or not, I mean, it's not really the essence of the matter. I think it's about the fact that you defended truth in a very courageous manner, in a way that most leftists, I don't think, especially in the U.S. or in the West, would have been able to do. You know, he accused you for clout chasing, but there's a fundamental difference between our project of growing in followers and his. His is done for its own sake. He lives off of this. His whole essence is careerism and playing off his supposed belief of leftist or pseudo-socialist ideals in order to get more donations and followers and everything that comes with that from the material standpoint. The purpose of our growth online is so that we can use that movement to actually promote a revolutionary change in our country. We're disgusted by what the ruling class is heading humanity into. We're disgusted by this tiptoeing us into a nuclear Armageddon with a war against Russia and a upcoming war against China, which leading U.S. generals are predicting that by 2024, the war against China will fully start. So we're disgusted by that, and we see that the only solution to any of those evils is socialism, and that we have to get serious about this. And this is, you know, this online field is a serious field of struggle in today's world, and it means that we have to engage in it. It means that we have to grow, that we need people to, you know, recommend our channel to whoever they know is sympathetic to these ideas, to talk to their friends, to participate in these sorts of things. And, you know, just to plug a new aspect of our institute, tomorrow we're starting Marxism, the Basics of Marxism course that's headed by Noah. Eddie and I will be there in as many classes as we can. But it's a course that's aimed at helping people understand what the Marxist outlook is, how it is that you can consistently approach the world with a Marxist worldview that would guarantee that you not only have truth on your side, but the best possibilities for organizing workers in your country. We're serious about the project of constructing socialism in the U.S. and educating people in the Marxist worldview and in Marxist political education. So if you want to join those classes, The way you join is by becoming a Patreon. With $1 a month, you can do it. So consider becoming a Patreon. Today's the last day to sign up. So I wanted to let you guys know. And then tomorrow the classes start at what time, Noah?
5 p.m. Eastern. I also want to just real quick reinforce what Carlos is saying. To compare Vish's rank career opportunism and taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from people and the tiny amount that our institute gets from only a small part of our project, which is social media, is just not even apples and oranges, but apples and the number 6. It just doesn't make sense, right? We're publishing books. We're putting on classes. We're a whole institute that this is a part of. And we do not make that much money from it. It certainly wouldn't be able to have any of us live off of it. But anyway, yeah. Not only does the class start tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, and you can sign up through Patreon, but we're also going to be live streaming it. So if for some reason you can't get involved, if the seats are filled or whatever, don't worry, you can still watch. And it'll be going on for at least 12 weeks. So, or at least 8 weeks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm super. Oh, sorry, finish.
No, that's it. That's it. I was only going to say, I also am going to, at some point this week, do a live stream where I'm going to go through the entire debate and point out every instance that Vaush is lying and manipulating and whatnot. So stay tuned for that too.
That'll be quite interesting. We should consider recording the classes, and I see some people asking, and putting them up for people.
Yes.
But yeah, other than that, I don't have anything else. I'll let kind of letting the public decide what they thought of the debate. Has gone well so far, but I appreciate you guys for coming on and giving me feedback. Appreciate people in the chat for that as well. Yeah, I really like Noah's new name for Vaush, Vish. That's a good one. So yeah, that's all I got. But any last words, guys?
It plays on the 2 V's. If you change the V, it wouldn't be super woke, but it'd be perhaps a correct assessment of Fetish. But yeah, by the way, because it's live streamed, that means that like these other live streams, it will be like up and recorded, so people would be able to watch it even if they're not like actually in the classroom or watching it live. I think they'll still be able to catch it in the same way as any of our other live streams. But yeah, I'm extremely proud of you, brother, and hopefully we can have more debates like this. I think you can take anyone on, and you showed that by debating someone who, although there was no substance behind their arguments, they were very tactical and employed many sophisticated and rhetorical tactics that are difficult to argue against. But you kept your composure, you kept your concentration, and you focused on the facts and the truth. And I think it's very clear that you won the debate, and that you just completely, in Spanish it would say lo aplastaste. You completely squashed it. So congrats.
Thank you, absolutely. You by far won the debate, brother. Also super proud of you. We do have feelers out there for other debates. That sort of reactionary guy, Drew Pavlov, has twice so far agreed to debate me and then twice ghosted me. So, maybe he found out who we were. But that said, big loss for Vaush, and good job, brother. Yeah, that's it.
You still have that thing where you press the button and you hear the clapping?
Oh yeah.
So let's do this. Hold up. Let's congratulate Eddie, and then after we congratulate you, you press it. All right. So on 3, Noah, Eddie, congratulations.
Good job, Eddie.
There we go. All right, folks. Well, we'll play our goodbye video, and thank you for staying with us for the last hour and 24 minutes, and we'll see you next time.
problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.